All right. So this week's paper or the review in Body by Science was titled "What Causes a Weight Loss Plateau, Metabolic Adaptation, or Lack of Dietary Adherence." I think a very helpful paper for all us nutrition coaches, but probably also for ourselves when we sometimes make excuses for ourselves or want to figure out why we are hitting a weight loss plateau potentially. And the study that they reviewed was titled "Effect of Dietary Adherence on the Body Weight Plateau, a Mathematical Model Incorporating Intermittent Compliance with Energy Intake Prescription," from 2014. So just for a little bit of background, they noted that in that paper itself, they used weight loss and fat loss interchangeably. Of course, ideally, we are mostly focused on fat loss. And like Mike just said, they are talking about Gen Pop because with a competitor, we generally assume there is a higher level of, of adherence. And most of the weight loss plateaus are probably more due to metabolic adaptation or just generally more of a physiological component, I guess. The overall question that they posed was, how do you know if your client or yourself is experiencing a real weight loss plateau? So ideally, and I loved this point, ideally with your client, we would have a predefined definition of what constitutes as a weight loss plateau. So let's just say you talk to your client and you say, hey, okay, yes, if for 2 weeks, we're seeing the same average weekly weight. When we're in a calorie deficit, we're going to say that that constitutes as a weight loss plateau, and we might make adjustments, or more conservatively, perhaps if for 4 weeks, especially if the client perhaps doesn't weigh in daily. So I have clients that don't really like weighing in every single day. They weigh in maybe 3 times a week. I do think 3 times that's usually a good minimum sort of amount. And in that case, and we often say more like 4 weeks, or they might have said, considering female hormonal fluctuations or water retention or whatever it is, 4 weeks might also be a good time frame. But I really liked this point in this paper that they were saying, hey, it pays off to talk to your client beforehand what constitutes as a plateau. Right. So in the introduction, said, okay, again, metabolic adaptation is usually when the metabolism slows down to a greater extent than expected, making it harder and harder to lose weight. And ultimately, our metabolism slows down so much that we cannot induce further weight loss, even though we're following what used to be a reduced calorie diet. So potentially now a new maintenance. And we've spoken about this numerous times, obviously, before, that your basal metabolic rate reduces a little bit, but mostly NEAT, mostly lower thermic effect of food, and so on. And what this paper showed so interestingly was that hypothetically, a plateau should occur only 1 to 2 years after dieting, after 1 to 2 years, and whereas in reality, we very, very often see it after 6 months of dieting. So they used some mathematical models. So for instance, the reduced energy expenditure model, which determined if a slowing down of the metabolic rate during the diet was the cause of an early weight loss plateau. And then they also used the adherence model to determine if an intermittent lack of adherence was the cause of an early weight loss plateau. And for a quote from the study, or from the review rather, mathematical modeling can provide valuable insights to a current research problem, but it is inferior to designing and conducting a high quality research study with real human subjects to answer the research question. Nonetheless, in this instance, I think it was a great model, since they also pulled data, or pulled data in from rather old studies, which we're going to get into. So, for example, they had the Minnesota starvation study, which we've spoken about a couple of times before, from I believe the 60s. And of course, there was not that many people, only 13 people, but they were in a very, very, very tightly controlled research facility, and it was over 6 months. So, that's a pretty good duration. And then there was another study, and I don't remember when exactly that was from, which they called the Calorie, and that was 12 people, and they had only a 25% calorie reduction, which is still large, but not as large as in the Minnesota starvation study. And it was free living, so not as tightly controlled, but also 6 months. So again, as a reminder here, the purpose was not to see if a plateau would occur, but rather when. So they assumed that one would occur. The thing that I will note there, or that I think is interesting there, is that they're saying from according to the mathematical equation, the plateau shouldn't occur until 1 or 2 years. So within the time frame of this study, they were expecting not to even see a plateau really. But yeah, again, so that was a little bit contradictory in my mind. But the results showed, or a simulation probably more showed, that if a dieter is 100% adherent to the diet, metabolic adaptation does not occur within the first 6 months even. So the evidence presented in the study indicates that even very high and unrealistic levels of metabolic adaptation do not affect the timing of weight plateaus. Rather, the seemingly innocuous intermittent loss of dietary adherence results in weight loss graphs with 6 months plateaus. And these results point to the sensitivity of dietary adherence in determining the kinetics of weight loss. I have to admit, I was very surprised by these results. Not saying that I didn't know that many clients are not fully adherent to their diet, but I do think that or I did think, from experience with working with a certain people, that sometimes after 12 or 16 weeks even, it seemed, or it appeared, that they had somewhat of a metabolic adaptation, or at least a little bit of a weight loss plateau. But yeah, I guess when it comes to just some notes that they took from it, they recommended from this, judging or going from this conclusion, that it is always good to reconnect with your client regarding the definition of a plateau, but also troubleshooting for adherence. What I liked as well was that doesn't mean we should always say straight away to a client, like, it's definitely due to the fact that you're not fully adherent, because scientifically it cannot be possible that you're in a plateau already, or blah blah blah. So it shouldn't result into us blaming someone if they're plateauing after just 3 months, for instance. But nonetheless, I think if for a coach, this was a very helpful sort of review. And then the next point being that actual weight loss plateaus are much more likely to occur in competitors rather than general population, kind of logical, as we've said already. And weight loss plateaus are not as likely to occur or as quickly due to physiological reasons as we might think. And I'll be interested to hear your guys's thoughts on this as well. But first, just also going over the comments of the review of the other two coaches in there. So Casey, I actually just had her on my podcast also. She was lovely. So Casey said, for her, this was mostly an encouragement for us coaches to do less telling what to do, and less instructing, like, you need to be more adherent, you need to do this and this and this. Most people know that what they should be doing, but simply asking more questions, more like, okay, how are you feeling? How do you feel like you were super accurate with all your logging? Did you really log everything? Or, and not necessarily in a blaming kind of manner, but also just like, how did you, yeah, how did it go? So asking more questions, I think that's a really great point also. And then Stephen, the other guy, said what I said earlier too, don't expect non-adherence, but also always keep it in the back of your mind as a possibility. Understand your clients' struggles better. They have a life, they have social engagements, they want to eat out, all these kind of things. Acknowledge lifestyle stressors, monitor biofeedback. We all do that, especially hunger as well. And in case of complacency, which I think that's probably one of the most common reason as the diet goes on further, you know, as you hit month 4, month 5, and so on, complacency starts setting in. So then maybe setting new goals when they're like super close to their goals, or maybe like 5 kg away from their goals, and it's like, oh, I'm already looking pretty good, I'm not quite where I want to be, and then just kind of tightening that up, or setting more specific goals or more performance oriented goals perhaps. But what I also thought was, this is why actually Bill Campbell also is such a big fan of refeeds and diet breaks, I think, because more than anything, they can help with adherence. It's not so much about potential scientific evidence for them, as we've heard a number of times, but more so for the sense of, okay, I'm now allowed, I don't need to be non-adherent most of the time. Now on my refeed days, I'm allowed to have more, etc., or diet breaks to look forward to reset that mindset afterwards and go hard again. But yeah, so that was basically my thoughts. But I'm interested to hear if you guys were also surprised by this, in the sense of when hypothetically metabolic adaptation should actually set in or not.
I was surprised by it. I think there's a little piece that's missing for me, and that is when we're talking about non-compliance, it's sort of assumed here that the person is not compliant but aware. And so you kind of touched on it with talking about accuracy. I find that a lot of times with clients, when they're not quote unquote adherent or things aren't moving, it's down to the accuracy. And that isn't just it's recording everything, logging everything that you're eating, but also doing that in an accurate way. If you're weighing cooked rice, log it as cooked rice, not raw rice. Like, there are a lot of errors that can be made, and there's a lot of like inaccurate stuff in MyFitnessPal. You'll log like, this is oil and it's 10 calories for a tablespoon of oil, and you're like, that's not right. So
Oh, that's a good
I
point.
think that a lot of times the quote unquote non-adherence is in the inaccuracy in recording and then choosing the right foods you're logging and all of that.
Oh, I love that you're saying that, and totally also with the intent. So many times I have seen that, for example, one thing is the oil spray. I don't know if you've logged that, but like, of course, the oil spray, it says 0 calories per pump. And then if you read underneath, it's like a quarter of a second equals 1 pump. Well, who in the world sprays for a quarter of a second? Most people go, like, if they have a pan and they're like, and that's like 3 seconds, and that, I mean, that's maybe 4 or 5 grams of fat. But if you do that 3 times a day, there you go. And then
Yeah.
another time where I've seen that numerous times, like, okay, you get more hungry, so what do people do? They turn towards gum and diet beverages. And gum, like, I literally had a client, she told me later, she chewed 2 packages of gum. Each gum was 5 calories, and there was 20 pieces of gum in 1 package. So, I mean, although it's largely sugar, alcohol, and stuff like that, or like calories that might not get absorbed and processed properly, still it adds up. She ate like 100 calories of gum every single day, and then have some diet drinks. They might say like less sugar or hardly any sugar or whatever, but it might still have like 16 calories per 100 milliliters. And then if someone drinks like 2 liters of that thing. Like you say, totally. I've seen this so many times. It's such a great point.
And it's so easy to believe I am adherent. I don't know what's wrong. So clearly there's metabolic adaptation happening. That must be. And then, you're reporting to your coach, I've been 100% adherent. But that we overlook the error and we
Yeah,
think, oh, you're right. You must be in a plateau. It must be metabolic adaptation. It's easy to make that leap.
such a good point. No, I love it. Thank you for sharing your point.
Sure.
Other thoughts, experiences?
I have
Like,
something. Oh, oh,
Go ahead.
go on.
I think the only point kind of related to what Alison said and what they mentioned, what Stephen mentioned in his feedback as well, is it's hard to know whether they took into account lifestyle factors such as, again, like stress, hormones, etc. Because again, like sometimes someone could be not getting much sleep, and again, that could have a number of different effects, which could be causing their weight to do funny things. And it's like, is the mathematical model able to account for that? And also, I had a reflection as you were talking, Lisa, that this mathematical model is dependent on the data that it was given. And granted, the Minnesota study and the calorie study, as robust studies and as good a level of evidence as they probably were, that it probably doesn't capture real life the same. So, and again, and that's why what they mentioned in the limitations as well is that this is never going to be gold standard evidence. We've got to always take this with a bit of pinch of salt.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's a great point, since they had, well, at least in the first one, had all the meals provided for them as well. But yeah, I guess, Tom, also from your perspective now, coming out of the deficit, and you even said before we talked about this that you weren't like fully compliant with stuff in your prep and so on. Yeah, do you have any thoughts on the adherence perspective, or just generally?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a coach, as we've established, although I am now looking to get into that, but that's a
Oh,
different story.
cool.
But yeah, I guess from my perspective as a client, it's tricky. It's tricky because how far do you want to go is probably a good question to ask. So I guess my goal was at the extremis of things, and so the standard would be to track everything. And perhaps, Mike, you might have done that when you competed. So like tracking every single like sauce and drink and gum and everything. I haven't done that ever, and I never ever will, because I just don't want to. But that, of course, then leads you to the inherent errors. There's also the inherent errors, the 10 to 20% that you get on nutrition labels. There's the mistakes that you make. There were some days where I'd like think that I've tracked something, and then I found out that actually, oh no, on the label it's actually half of this. And I'm like, oh shit, God, that's it, I've done it. There's the complex relationship with the food and your weight and how you look, and your coach as well. Like Steve, if you spoke to Steve, he'd probably tell you that I was a bit, well, maybe he wouldn't say I'm a nightmare, but there was difficulties because sometimes you don't want to admit to things, because there's the inherent guilt with foods that people have. So it's just a real minefield. So it's not at all surprising to me that the adherence model works and the metabolic adaptation doesn't. And I think the rest of the evidence sort of pans out with that as well.
No, I think that's really a great insight, actually, because I mean, I think all things considered, you're still you're a very reflective person. Probably, you know, if Steve asks you point blank, etc., you are very honest with him. I assume you have a pretty good relationship with him. And then I think other clients are not as like self-reflecting as you are, and are not as or don't have that same level of bond with their coach, and so they're even less open. And yeah, I think, I mean, of course it's difficult admitting when you're not adherent, because you also want to please that other person and so on, but still very good point. Yeah, I don't know, Laura, do you have any thoughts on it as well?
It very similar to what everybody else has mentioned. And something that popped up for me was around that 6-month mark. It makes sense because people kind of get into maybe not necessarily self-sabotage, but oh, I've done this long enough. I'm close enough. Like, this is not just everybody, but just I'm close enough to my initial goal. Maybe I can just release some of the reins. Not so, we know it's just you're not quite as motivated. Things slow down as you get deeper into the dieting phase. So yeah, it's not surprising. I guess it was more about, you know, when we do work with more general population, it's how do we kind of foresee this happening, and then what to do about it on a case per case basis, because everybody is different. Their biofeedback will be different. But now that we kind of have like this is a general idea of when things start to kind of get a little rocky, how can we front load it for our clients?
Great point. No, I love it. The front loading. Yeah. I mean, for me, that was one of the things I was going to say in terms of like main takeaways from this is just periodizing, because most people sometimes they also feel like they can push through, and then it's not until they do hit that point of becoming non-adherent that it's like, oh, it's too late, we've let it go on for too long, we should have cut it short, or done a diet break after 4 months, after 5 months or 6 months or whatever, and then resumed. Sometimes they think, oh, you know, I can push through another 3 to 4 months. So yeah, periodization for sure, a good takeaway from this. And Melissa, you were going to say something earlier, right? Sorry.
Yes. I wanted to say that I wasn't surprised because I did study it in Menos course, and he had the same takeaway, that is rarely metabolic adaptation, and most of the time it's just lack of adherence.
Mm-hmm.
And he gave us a tool. It was a document in Word, because he said it does not work to ask your client, are you compliant? Because most of the people is going to answer yes.
Mm-hmm.
So he said he had studied, and through the years he developed a questionnaire that made it non-personal. So instead of asking, are you adherent? He asked, out of the 7 days of last week, how many days did you fulfill your calorie target? The next question was, again, over the same point. How many days did you go over your target, to see if answer 2 would actually make sense with question 1. Then it was like, how many days of the last week did you fulfill your protein target?
Mm-hmm.
And then did you log all your foods on Monday? Did you log all your foods on Tuesday? Wednesday? So going over and over like a police questionnaire, like, where were you yesterday? Okay. And what were you doing at that hour? And the next minute. Because if you're lying, even if you're lying to yourself, once you write it down and you have to really reflect, you cannot lie to yourself so many times. At some point you give up. So he said he finds out in basically 100% of his clients that it was a lack of compliance, and they didn't notice it until they write it down.
I was just going to say this, the great thing with this seems to me that they realize their mistake themselves after a while, probably, as opposed to you pointing it out to them and then they're like, oh yeah, you caught me.
Yeah. So I have the document. It's like a Word document. I can share you if it
That'd
is
be
useful
great.
for someone.
Yeah.
But it was his tool to give to the clients, and then they come to the conclusion that, well, actually, not really. I thought so, but not. And then you can work with that. Okay, so 3 days of last week you were over your calories, but on average, you think that you did well because you did better than last week. So that's why they answer, yes, I did well. So
Love it.
you should, he says you should assume they are lying to you, because most of the time they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. You're talking about the weekly average, because I had a client who she would have days where she was way over, and then she would cut it really short on the other days so that she could overall for the weekly average look compliant. And I started to see a pattern of overindulge, over restrict, and then you over restrict, so you want to overindulge because you're starving the next day. And so she's riding this roller coaster so that she can hit those weekly averages. So I added a column to her tracker that did the math for her so she could see Monday, you overshot your calories by 400 calories. Tuesday, you were over by 500, and then you get to Thursday and you're under by 600. No wonder you were over by 700 the next day. So it kind of gave her a visual of, this is the roller coaster that you're riding. And if you can just kind of hit the middle, closer to the middle every day, you're not going to be like bouncing back and forth on that.
I love that.
You can even plot it. You can even put in the Excel function so that it plots, and you can actually see the graph, how it goes up and down and up and down and up and down.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
yeah. I think, I mean, I've done that on purpose. Like, okay, I know the weekend is coming, and I know that I have a kid's birthday and I have a dinner with my friends.
Cool.
So I'm gonna scrape 100 calories every day so that I have these extra 500 for the weekend. But like, okay, there is a target, there is something that is coming on the weekend. Not every weekend is gonna be like this, but some seasons in life you have a lot of birthdays, and like there is Christmas season, for example, and there for me it did make sense to do the week with low calories so that on the weekend you have more calories for the social events that are coming.
But not as a lifestyle.
Exactly.
No, awesome. Cool. Any last thoughts on this paper? Don't know why
I thought it was very well written, and it was extremely well explained, like very digested and very clear. And this is what we're talking about. This is the population we're talking about. Reminder, this is the population we're talking about. And they still write again, like, and this population is this. So I think it was very, very clear.
I agree.
Very digested.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for the feedback. I'll stop sharing my screen. And now to the little quote unquote homework or just point of interest that I gave. I just wanted to hear from everyone, well, how, number one, they got into strength training, what sparked the interest, and just generally like what sort of mistakes they made in the beginning, maybe the first year or even years, or yeah, just to get to know each other a little bit better. I guess that was the main reason for the question.
If you don't mind, I continue, because I was
Yes.
talking before, and something there related to more or less the paper of today. So I did started because I had cancer, and then after the cancer decided to do something. I found someone in Instagram that I followed, and I was like, yeah, let's do this. And it was during the pandemic, so body weight at home with videos, and it was my first approach. So it was good because I grew a lot from doing home workouts until we could go out, and then I went to the gym and I began learning, and it was nice, and I enjoyed it a lot, especially this core from like I cannot do a push-up to I can do one push-up. I can actually do 10 push-ups. So that was really nice, and I did like how my body changed. On the relationship of this and the paper, when I began working with Lisa, I remember that I had my Taylor coaching at that point, tracker, and Lisa made an estimation, a normal estimation, like I think you need to lose 3 kilos because I'm tiny, so 3 kilos for me, it's a lot. And once you reach 48 kilos in these 12 weeks, we're gonna be there. Okay, fine. So I set up, I set up, I thought it was a magical number. So after 12 weeks, we were not there. And I thought I was compliant. Then it was 16 weeks, and then it was 20 weeks, and we were still not there. I was like, "When am I going? What is wrong with me? What I am doing that I shouldn't be doing? And I still couldn't. I think my body was just slower to respond to what the average of the population is, and I was angry at me for that. And when I finally, after many, 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 many weeks, way more than 12, I reached the 48 kilos, I didn't look like I wanted to look, not even close to. I was much better than before, but I wasn't where I wanted to be. And that was for me like if someone took out the floor out under my feet. But like, okay, I did everything. I do the workouts. I do the MyFitnessPal thing. I weigh 48 kilos, but I still have something hanging on my belly, and I don't like that. And I remember I had this conversation with Lisa, and she said, well, it was an estimation, and this is how we thought, but we can continue. But there was like a before and after for me there, because I thought, okay, well, how low do I have to go?
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that I revisit every time, because it's like, okay, is this actually possible?
Mm-hmm.
How low does my weight have to be for me to not have someone hanging on something hanging from my belly? And the answer is probably there is no weight for that will bring me this image, because this is just skin that is hanging from 2 pregnancies. And I would have been grateful if someone would have said that at the beginning, that there was a possibility that this was not just fat, but also skin, because it created on me false expectations. And then I thought I hadn't fulfilled them. I hadn't worked hard enough. So this is my story related to not the plateau, but the false expectations that I set for me. And I thought, okay, 48, and I'm going to look like this flat abdomen. And that was not the case. And that was really hard to deal with, and still is.
Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, it definitely goes into the today's topic, and also with the clearing expectations, not just of, hey, what constitutes as a plateau, but in regards to the weight specifically. And that was obviously like my error as well. We did say, oh, it's an estimation, but nonetheless, talking more specifically about like, okay, why are we attaching this number in the first place? Or more specifically, like, what are you aiming for in terms of aesthetic outcome, like what that looks like? But yeah, thank you for sharing. Who wants to go next?
I'll pop in next. So I was in grade 9, that was 1994. And I was playing high school sports. I was playing volleyball, and the senior volleyball coach was like, you girls are rock stars. We're going to start hitting the gym. So that was my first introduction to strength training. It was, again, many, many years ago. But I did follow through as I went to university. I still went to the gym. I didn't really have any direction, though. And I'm sure back then it was blogs or magazines. You'd find these workouts in magazines. So I guess, well, I'll try to do this. I never, same as you, Melissa, I was like, I'm never getting the body type that I wanted. And I remember very distinctly, I walked into the Lululemon, and there was one of the employees, and I was like, wow, you have really developed shoulders, you have some good musculature. So that kind of, and again, this was probably 20 years ago for sure. So I always had that visual in my mind, and then that kind of enticed me to look elsewhere. What else can I do to gain muscle? So in answer to your question, that's how I started. What do I wish I would have known? Proper training, but also like incorporating it into your lifestyle when you're in university or secondary college, or you're just getting into the workforce. Your dietary habits are not great. You're not sleeping, you're going out and socializing. So it was a real, when I reflect back, no wonder I was tired and not feeling well. I didn't have the body that I wanted because I didn't have the proper nutrition background back then to be able to facilitate my lifestyle and or my training. So yeah, that's where it started.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I guess, yeah, in our early 20s, for most people, it's like, yeah, well, you wanna live, you wanna experiment in other ways also. But cool that you got into strength training so early. I mean, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad I got into it when I did.
Very cool. Thank you. Buddy, next.
I'll go. I'll just start as an adult. We won't go back to my gymnast days as a child. But like Laura said, it was similar for me, finding workouts in magazines and then taking those to the gym. I didn't have a phone then because it was back in the 1900s. So it would have like this magazine cut out, and I'd go to the gym and do my little strength training with my little tiny weights or whatever. And I did that for a long time, or taking classes at the gym. Um, and then I was doing a lot of running. After I had kids, it was like I have very little time. I don't have time to myself. I need to like do whatever I can. So I just go running early in the morning. I did a few triathlons. I did 4 triathlons, just sprint distance. I'm by no means an Iron woman. So I did a lot of that, but I was noticing like I'm just doing cardio and I am doing all this exercise and I'm still like high body fat. What the hell? So I joined a gym that I still to this day love because it shifted my thinking from feeling like, what do I look like, to what can I do? And that it made me feel like a badass. There's no other way to say it. Like we were lifting heavy weights with probably, I don't know, decent programming. I don't know. But we were lifting heavy weights and we're doing tons of running, lots of like really fast sprints and like maybe a mile max. And then we would run on the treadmill like 13 miles an hour, which is absurd. But I felt amazing, like amazing. But then I moved cities and it was too far away. So anyway, I went through a period of just yoga where I went to yoga teacher training and we did 200 hours of yoga and it was all yoga all the time. And then I was like, no, this isn't really what I need. So I started doing Madeline Moves program in 2019. And then I broke my toe, which you don't realize how much your little pinky toe is involved in your life until you can't use your little pinky toe. So I just dropped all the cardio, dropped everything other than strength training and just doing what I could with a little broken pinky toe. And in a very short period of time, my toe healed. And I started eating a lot of protein at that point too. I started learning about macros. I was eating like 140 grams of protein a day. I was strength training 5 days a week, and my body transformed amazingly in a very short period of time. I was like, who is this person? I have muscles. Oh my gosh. And I'm still not a muscular person. I have like the long, lean body type. But it was transformative for me, and it made me realize the value of that and what I could get out of that if I continued. So that sort of led me to where I'm at now, is with the macros and the strength training and the foundation existing in strength training and being able to like recover from those workouts, whereas cardio can really suck the life out of you. But I do really find value in challenge, goals, and accomplishments. So that's where cardio is sort of like the dessert of workouts for me, is like occasionally engaging in that to get what I need out of goals and accomplishment and grit and all of those things that I find really valuable. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. And yeah, pinky toe, I can imagine. It's almost
Poor
like
little guy.
those fingers and toes. Oh wow. Yeah, they influence your life a lot.
Yeah.
Tom, did you want to share also how you got into strength training?
Yeah, sure. I'm trying to remember myself. I guess I would have got into it when I was like 15. Yeah. So 15. So yeah, over a decade. I just started going because I was a fat kid and I didn't like being fat anymore. So yeah, I started doing workouts at home, like lost some weight, got some. I managed to get like some dumbbells at home. I can't remember who I was inspired by. It was something stupid. I think it was like Jersey Shore or something ridiculous. Um, as kids are. And I remember like, yeah, it was Jersey Shore because I remember buying one of the like Ed Hardy t-shirts and thinking, oh, maybe I can look like these guys, you know. I could have these like huge arms, and I had no idea that they were on steroids and stuff. Didn't even know that existed. Anywho, so yeah, probably started about then, and then a friend joined me, and we ended up like sneaking into a gym, and then it all just went from there really. And I've lifted ever since. I've always done something ever since. Or, you know, played something, lifted weights, whatever. Yeah, just makes me happy.
I'll say I can absolutely not picture you as a fat kid, but I mean, awesome for turning your life around. Somehow you seem like someone who has a slim body type in general, but I mean, even cooler that you've managed to pull yourself out of that.
Oh yeah, I was like 100. It was nearly 120 kilo. I remember that. Might have been just above. I'm not sure.
Right.
So,
And what's
big,
your weight at the moment?
at the moment, it's 70, 78, 77.
Oh, so
Something
you
like that.
you almost halved your weight from then. Wow.
Yeah, I was a big boy.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
No problem.
Right. Well, for me, I mean, most of you kind of know my story a little bit, but yeah, I basically after university, so in university I played like all kinds of sports, but nothing really, never like exercise for the exercise sense, more like track and field and swimming and volleyball and whatnot. And then yeah, towards the later half of university when we didn't have to be active anymore, I just continued with like yoga and running and swimming, and I got so bored of it. I was like, I mean, this is something, and I started doing like home-based body weight workouts, which I started seeing results, like especially my arms and just in terms of physique already. But I was bored like working out on my own, and then I started watching more CrossFit videos. Like that was like 2012 or so, when it really had its like uprise and became super popular. And I was like, this looks like so much fun, but I don't ever want to look like any of these women because they don't look like women anymore. And thankfully, my ex-husband at the time, he was like, I think you should try it anyway because you're so frustrated. Like, you know, what's the worst what do you have to lose? But during that time, like the CrossFit box that was near us, it was actually a really good box because they said you need to do a 12-week what they called like on-ramp thingy. So every week go to 3 workouts, and they actually did like a proper introduction class. So that was really good. And it didn't take 12 classes. It took 1 class until I was hooked, basically, because it was like, this is awesome, so much variety, and just like Allison and Melissa said, like learning or feeling what it feels like to be able to do stuff and to do your first pull up, even if it's with a band, and like all these kinds of things. And of course, as you also know, I got way too much into it. And so what I would tell that version of myself, or I was 24 at the time, my 24-year-old self would just be to pace it. You've got all your life. You don't need to do 2-a-day trainings. You don't need to feel like you're going to be a competitor, because unfortunately there are 16-year-olds that lift like twice as much as you do. And so there's no real point of you trashing your body and your nervous system in order to just get a little bit better. That's what I would tell myself, because yeah, I mean, I did have quite a few injuries that caused me to having to stop completely. And if not, you know, I possibly would still be doing it more for fun and not necessarily aesthetic focus. But yeah, that was my introduction to strength training. So thanks for sharing your story, everybody, and of course for your time in general. I will send through another, it's going to be another Bill Campbell review, because I subscribe to his review now, and I got all of the reviews from the beginning of the year, so we have a little bit to catch up on. Cool. Well, have a nice evening or afternoon. Bye.
Thanks so much. See you next week.